Teachers, what is the most NSFW thing have you done in your classroom? I was a marching band instructor, just in the summer for band camp. One of the kids was eating a bag of Skittles during a break and she asked me, "Do you want to taste my rainbow?" Without thinking, I blurted out, "Not until you're 18. I wasn't fired. I was teaching 5, 7, 8-years beginning woodworking at a private school and we were painting our projects. We were in a room alone, and I was a 35-year male. A young girl who was wearing a denim shorts and skirt set got paint all over her skirt. I caught myself with my hand under her skirt trying to wash the paint off with a wet cloth and thought, what would anyone think if they walked in on this scene? I'll let her clean off the paint as best she could and finish the class. It scared the hell out of me. My 7th grade English teacher, who was in her first year, never had control of her classroom. A couple weeks before the end of the year, our class was arguing with her about something, and she screamed, "F you all." Never saw Mrs. Wallace again. My science teacher freshman year had the best way to get students to not text in class. He gave a student a not-in-use phone before class and told him to pretend he was texting halfway through class. He proceeded to walk towards the student and request the phone from him. The student pretends to put up a fight, but eventually gives the teacher the phone. The class was on the 2nd story, was an outside school, and the teacher started to walk to the door and throw the phone off the 2nd story. The student, pretending, started to freak out, but all the other students' faces were all priceless. None of the students ever texted in class again. Students were using perfume in water pistols. Teacher got sprayed. She stabbed student with pencil. Student got in trouble. Good times 1960. I used to sub at a couple of high schools. If I had some downtime when the kids were taking a test, I'd grab the roster and start looking up the kids' Twitters. It always amazed me how stupid kids are with social media. Pictures of them doing drugs, drinking, talking about teachers, gossiping about other students. Finding the "I hate this" or "we have the hot sub" tweets were always the highlight of my day. Not a teacher, but in training. I was in placement within a primary school and a little kid did himself. I felt really bad for him and went to get a teacher without others finding out, but this kid started screaming that someone had it under his desk. I then realized he had scooped it out and threw it under his desk and squishing it under his shoe for authenticity. Anyway, I then had to escort a whole class out of a classroom and tell the real story to a teacher, which suspended the child for 2 days. This isn't NSFW, but in retrospect, it was careless and could have gotten me in lots of trouble. My neighbor had a mannequin that was the same height as me. I had a pinhead mask. Halloween was a little over a week away. I couldn't resist. Day 1, students enter the class and see Pinhead sitting behind my desk. They know it's me, and they are right. It is me. But for 5 minutes into the period, I refuse to move or talk. After 5 minutes, I take off the mask and start teaching. I never talk about the mask. Day 2, students enter and see Pinhead again, sitting at my desk. The bell rings and class begins. After a minute I walk into the room and start teaching. Students get nervous and start looking at Pinhead, who is sitting at my desk. When they ask me about it, I refuse to acknowledge it. Focus on class, I yell at them. Day 3, Pinhead is still sitting at my desk. I'm at the front of my class. As I predicted, students are now more courageous. They approach the mannequin and try to touch it. I preempted by admitting that, yes, it's just a mannequin. I knock on its head so they can hear the hollow plastic underneath. Even so, throughout class, I see them stealing worried glances at the mannequin. Day 4, Pinhead is still there at the desk. I tell the students, sorry, I just haven't taken him home yet, since it's weird to leave the school with a life-size mannequin. We laugh. Day 5, Pinhead is still there. I tell my students that I'm actually quite enjoying his company. I make him a prop in my Spanish class, using him to model dialogue. Oh, teacher, you're so quirky. Day 6, mannequin Pinhead remains. I remind students that their chapter exam is in 3 days. That's on Halloween. They complain. Day 7, Pinhead still sits at my desk in the same position. Students are forgetting about him. Day 8, Pinhead is old hat now. Seriously, teacher, the joke is getting old. Day 9, test day. Students begin a big, fake, unit exam. Their heads are buried in concentration. I'm standing at the front of class. Pinhead is at the back, sitting at my desk. Without making a sound, Pinhead gets up and walks towards the students. He doesn't growl, he doesn't lunge, he just walks. Students panic. Desks are knocked over. They run, screaming, out of the room, clear down to the other end of the hallway. Teachers come pouring out of their classrooms. The principal and vice principal come running at full speed from the floor below. It is chaos, absolute chaos. It's my favorite moment as a teacher. Working as a classroom tar in a primary school, the teacher was talking recycling and composting. She drew an apple core on the whiteboard, only it looked exactly like a vagina. In a fit of giggles I had to leave the room to compose myself. Not me, but my 10th grade biology teacher was answering a question from a student who asked, "Can another animal impregnate a human?" He replied, "I'm sure we've all been in that situation. Click one wrong link on the internet and whoa, what is she doing with that horse?" But no, that is not possible. Math teacher got mad after a kid made a smart aleck remark, asked him to drop his pants in front of the whole class to prove how big his balls were. He was fired. Never found out the size of that kid's balls. My father is a history teacher at a high school in the city. Once a particularly churlish student, who sat in the front row, was blatantly and shamelessly on his phone in the middle of class. Naturally, my father tells him to hand over the phone. Surprisingly, the kid gives it up without a fight. However, the kid quickly pulls another phone out of his pocket. "I have 2 phones," the kid sneers. He points to the phone in his hand. "This one is for business." He points to the phone in my father's hand, "And that one is for pleasure." "Well then," my father says, "that explains why this one is on vibrate." To this day my dad is surprised that he didn't lose his job right then and there. Teaching a science class about goats and sheep. To show the kids, middle schoolers and high schoolers, the animals up close, we planned on going to a livestock auction. To prep them for the auction, I told them to not point or raise their hands, because it was an actual auction and they might bid on the animal accidentally. For the respect of the community and business, they shouldn't do anything that looked like they were bidding. Then the questions came. What if we bid? Who would have to pay for it? What if I raise my hand to ask you a question? What if I think the animal is cute and bid on it? One kid wouldn't let it go, so I said, jokingly, "If you bid on any of the animals, I'll put you up for auction." Only African American kid in the class. Didn't get fired. Felt awful. When I was in high school, everyone had suspicions that this one teacher was gay. During one class he was opening files from his laptop and they were being projected onto the overhead. Accidentally opened a folder of naked photos of himself and another man. Entire class of grade 10 saw. Safe to say all suspicions were confirmed. Had a substitute teacher and wrote his name Mr. Whore, pronounced whore, on the whiteboard. He opened with, "Yes gentlemen, I know what you're thinking and you're correct. I'm a whore. My mother was a whore. My father was a whore and even my sister." Talk about engaging the class from the get-go. Had a class of 6 retesters. The retest results came back in early December and they had all passed. Since I knew I wouldn't have them back in my class after Christmas break, I thought f it and decided to culture them by showing Pulp Fiction over the course of 3 days if they promised not to say a word to the administration. The only part one skipped was the actual raping in the rape scene. Got away with it clean. I'm a little embarrassed to admit this, but here it goes. Sometimes after the droves of 14 and 15-year-olds shuffle back to their respective homes for the day, I take my shoes off and walk around the building in my socks. Well, I actually harass my entire class. We were discussing capture in regards to AI versus human intelligence, and I made the mistake of using a capture with a D. Flash forward to the middle of class, where I'm asking one of my students, Jard, "You've seen many Ds before, but never this D. How do you know it's a D? Does it have some kind of D-ness? What makes a D a D, etc." At this point most of the class is laughing. Jard is very confused, and I'm just hating myself. Lesson learned, do not discuss the D or its D-ness with undergraduates. My buddy once took me to some sketchy house to buy some weed. and there is an elementary school teacher in the living room shooting heroin on her lunch break. She finishes, high as f, grabs her lunch off the kitchen table, and says, "Oh f, my lunch break is almost over. Time to get back to teaching kids." She laughs, walks out the back door, and my buddy asks the guy we were meeting if she really is a school teacher. The guy, also f***ed up from slamming dope, says, "Yeah, she teaches little elementary kids and shit." What the f***? Okay, I'm not proud of this, but here we go. It was my first year teaching high school English to a bunch of thugs. I was only a few years older than some of them. Near the end of class, two guys are arguing loudly, and I tell them to knock it off. They ask me to settle their argument for them. This on kid, let's call him Greg, says, "Mr. Cano Head, if some guy puts a gun to your head and tells you to give him a blob, you'd have to do it, right?" "Greg," I say, "that's not a conversation to have during class." The whole class is listening intently now. "Well," says Greg, "if someone put a gun to my head and told me to give him a blob, I'd do it." "Well, Greg," I said, "I'll remember that the next time I have a gun." The class erupts in laughter. Somehow I don't get fired. I'm very scared of wasps. My students knew this. A wasp flew in my classroom. I left the classroom and shut the door behind me, put my foot down so they couldn't open it, and told them they weren't allowed out till they killed the wasp. They killed the wasp, and I later realized how I shouldn't trap 25 students in a room with a wasp. SRO saw me and just laughed. I never got in trouble. That I've ever done? Nothing to NSFW, but there have been too many cringe-worthy moments to recall. Totally got busted staring down a student's shirt one time, and there was no way to explain that I wasn't perving. I was returning papers and my mind had gone blank as to her name. I was looking at the paper on her desk that had her name, which she shifted right under her just as I was looking at it. I mean, I was really trying to get a good look, craning my neck and everything. Didn't even try to explain. Girl was very cute, and there was no way she was going to believe me. Plus, I didn't want to admit that I couldn't remember her name.